So alongside Super Orion, we actually have a new 3-star coming out in the game, and that is going to be Mandricardo, or Ricardo for short. And this is a servant that I feel like a lot of people just kind of gloss over. They don't really give him the respect he deserves, when he's a really, really strong, I would say more free-to-play option, because he is a rider that's available in every single banner. And he just seems to get overlooked by a lot of people that play FGO, and I really don't know why. So hopefully, after this video, you'll definitely consider leveling up your Mandricardo and taking him out for a spin, because he's definitely a very strong servant with a decent bit of utility that I've definitely used to some success over on the JP version of the game, and I'm excited to get to use him over on the NA version of the game if I can manage to pull him, because if you guys saw my Super Orion summons, didn't really go very well, but you know, I'm hoping that maybe round 2 summons will go a bit better for me. But enough about me. If you guys have not already, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe on this video. You know, your boy is on that daily FGO grind, and he's on the road to 100k, and every little bit of support definitely helps me out. If you want to see extra content, my Twitch is linked down in the description down below, as is a pretty decent opportunity if you want to earn 35 bucks. An indie game company has contacted me, and they really need people to help them out with beta testing their game. They need about 10 to 15 people to come down, join a Zoom call for about an hour, play test their game. I can't really give a lot of details for it, but it's basically going to be kind of like Fate Grand Order or Genshin Impact. It's kind of like anime RPG-esque as far as I'm aware. And for your time, they're willing to give you 35 bucks. I just mean as long as you get a PayPal or something to get the money from it. But it's a pretty good opportunity if you want to help them out and earn $35. It's about like 2 multis over on like FGO or something. And you know, the holidays are coming around, and if you need that little bit of extra gift money, you can do that. I don't know. I just think it's a very good opportunity to not only kind of like give some things back to you guys, since you guys can get a little bit of money, but then also help out like a small indie company, because I love small indie games. It's kind of a little niche passion of mine. So I just think it's a really cool opportunity. You can also join Loot Cakes down in the description down below. It's kind of another way to earn money back from spending money on FGO. But don't worry, even if you don't spend money on FGO, if you join my little Loot Cakes Alliance, you gain points for other people spending as well. And we basically like get more the more people we have in our alliance. And you can take those points and redeem them for like gift cards and whatnot. So just some neat things in the description. If you guys are interested in any of that, that is all down there. But with that being said, let's go ahead and just start getting into the servant review of our boy Mandricardo. And I mean, dude, he's literally got the alias of my friend. If you read Lost Pelt 5.1, you're going to come out of this thinking that Mandricardo is your homie, because Mandricardo's a pretty sick dude. Now, unfortunately, when you look at his hits really don't give off the impression that he's a super broken servant. If anything, I really think he has that 3-star syndrome, where a lot of the 3-star servants in the game don't really have the most impressive looking hits, bar a few of them here and there. And so some of them get written off when they really shouldn't be, because when you look at Mandricardo, you're like, okay, he's got 0.86 NP gain per attack, which is really high, but then 3 hits on 2 quick cards with only 9% star gen. He has 2 arts cards with that really high NP gen, but with 2 hits, you're going to be very reliant on getting crits to really refund a lot of that NP back. The 1-hit buster card basically means you can't do any star genning or any NP, you know, refund shenanigans with that, which if you didn't know, yeah, you can turn your buster cards into star genning cards or NP genning cards, depending if you're like, say, an Emiya or a Skandar for star gen, or if you're like a Skahawk or Summer Nobu for your buster NP gain cards. You typically need really high hits on the buster cards or stuff like that, but unfortunately Mandricardo doesn't even have that option open to him. And even the extra attack, you know, the glorious omnipotent extra attack, is really kind of lacking with Mandricardo at only 4 hits, which is really the average, and is a little unfortunate because the extra attack is a composite card that gens NP, stars, and does big boy damage, but it's really reliant on your natural NP gain and star genning abilities because it cannot crit. So you have a really high hit arts card with like lower NP gain. The arts card can make up for that by getting a crit, and it actually kind of averages out to actually giving you a pretty decent amount of your NP back because the hits are so high. But with the extra attack, you can't crit. So if you don't have really high natural NP gain or star gen levels, it just really doesn't work out to being all that broken. And unfortunately, with 4 hits, you can kind of take advantage of like the NP gain and a little bit of the star gen, but it's not going to be hitting different like these other characters with the 5, 6, 7 hit extra attacks, unfortunately. But his skills more than make up for all of this, because skill 1 is literally just a generically good skill. It gives him 30% defense for 3 turns, and it's a charisma, which is a 20% attack buff to the entire party for 3 turns, all on a 5-turn cooldown. Again, just a really good, solid, generic skill. because 30% defense on its own isn't really going to be all that notable. It's going to make him pretty decently tanky. But if you're running him with literally anybody else that can give him even more defense, like say Reigns, Waver, both Reigns and Waver, Bedivere, or even Mash, this defensive buff, because it stacks with the other defensive buffs, is going to make him really, really tanky. So it's a very solid combo piece if you want to give him any extra defensive buffs, or even some of the CEs as well. As you have things like the Kirei CE that give you like a passive 20% defense. So with this skill active, you just have passive 50% defense. And if you're going to go for like a really tanky build, he'll do really well for that. And then the charisma is always going to be good because that's supporting the entire party as well as his own damage. Now we're going to kind of skip the second skill because the second skill is a little different, as it's kind of like a last resort skill and it's not something that you're going to be able to really access all of the time. So instead, let's talk about skill 3. That way we kind of talk about his normal skills and then we'll talk about his Hail Mary skill. Skill 3 being a 20% buff to both his quick and arts cards for 3 turns, and then it also is a taunt for 1 turn, which gives him a decent bit of utility. Now, this buff is supposed to kind of fix up those issues I was talking about with the arts and the quick cards. And they may seem like kind of low values. You might be like, oh, 20% is really not all that much, but his NP kind of does retroactively fix this as well. But we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, the taunt is also something that's very, very valuable because you might be in a challenge quest where you want to draw the heat off of some of your support type units. But for Mandricardo in particular, he actually wants to take a little bit of that damage as well. So if you don't want to go a super tanky route and you want to try to access his second skill, this is also really good to having Mandricardo take some hits so you can get below that 50% HP threshold and get his insanely good second skill, which I guess we'll talk about right now. The second skill is basically a final Hail Mary for Mandricardo. You can only use it when his HP is 50% or less, but at the end of the turn, he will die. Now, this actually isn't as bad as it seems, because a servant being able to kill themselves like this in the battle is actually more useful than you would think. And you might think that's a little bit of a crazy thing to say, but consider why Arash is so good. Arash isn't only really good because he's a free NP5 archer that does a lot of damage. If that's all he did, he wouldn't be as good as he is today. It's because Arash does a lot of that damage and then can cycle himself out for another person in your party. He essentially functions as a plug suit and a really good wave 1 clear, and it gives him a lot of really good value. Mandricardo has the same thing, except it's built more for challenge quests, because he's obviously a single target servant that's meant to be doing boss killing, and so it makes him really good for a lot of these quests where you just need him to maybe fight a break bar or two, or maybe just get through the initial hard points of a boss fight, and then have him tag out for another support, tag out for another DPS servant. It's just a very generally useful ability to have. And it's not like he's going to be wasting this 1 turn because he gets insanely good buffs. He gets a 50% attack buff that only lasts for 1 attack, which I think is obviously supposed to be used with his NP. But even if you don't get to use it with his NP, he also gets a 100% crit damage buff for 1 attack as well, which basically means you either hit him really hard with an NP and then pretty hard with a crit, or you just hit him really, really hard with 1 ultra mega giga powerful crit. And then the other good thing is that he leaves your party with a little bit of nice debuffs on the enemy, as he cancels out their ability to recover HP for 1 turn, and he removes all of their defensive buffs for that attack as well. Meaning that even if you don't get to do damage with the NP, or you don't get to do a big crit, he does remove all of their defensive buffs, so your next DPS can finish the job. And this is a really, really useful skill to have on someone, especially if your box is a bit more limited, because essentially what you have is a servant that has a really solid defensive skill that means he shouldn't really get one shot when he taunts himself. That 30% defense is pretty much going to help him make sure that when he takes that hit, he's really only going to be under 50% HP and not getting completely one shot, right? Or that's at least what it's supposed to do in practice. And then you fall below 50% HP and you get this really strong second skill that you can pop whenever you want if you just need to do a lot of damage or maybe debuff the enemy a little bit and then cycle out to somebody else. Now, I did say we would talk about his NP, so let's go ahead and do that right now. And if you look at the overcharge, this is why his third skill only gives him a 20% buff for 3 turns, because the overcharge is giving him an Omni card buff of 20% and it lasts for that turn. And it obviously procs first, so what this means is that actually when he fires his NP for that turn, he has a 40% buff to all of his card types. And if you can get him to an overcharge level 3, he has a mana burst for his arts and quick cards for that turn. And so that not only means that his NP is going to be doing really good damage, but it also means his subsequent arts and quick cards are going to be doing pretty good damage, as well as the quick cards getting a little bit of a buff to their NP gain and their star gen, and the arts cards getting a pretty decent buff to their NP gain as well. The only downside is that he does lower his attack by 10% for that turn, but that's why I'm saying that even though the damage should be more than what he already had, because you basically have a 40% buff for your cards, and then after he fires his NP, you'll lower that by 10%, you still get the NP gain and the star gen values out of the quick and arts buff. So that's still really, really good. And then even then, it only lasts for the turn, and it's only 10%, and thankfully it doesn't even activate first. So it's more just annoying for the subsequent cards, but even then, like I'm saying, you still get the buffs for the NP gain and the star gen values for those cards. So is Mandricardo going to be like the best 3-star in the game, and you gotta level him up and use him immediately? Not necessarily. If you have other single target riders, you can definitely make do without him. For instance, if you have Sakamoto Ryoma, I know he's not the greatest single target rider, but he does do slightly more damage as a free NP5. Even if they're both NP5, he is out damaging him a little bit, and he still brings a little bit of team support. I know Ryoma's support isn't really the best, but you know, again, you can kind of get by without Mandricardo. Murasaki Shikabue rider is also going to be coming out, and she's also fine enough to use as a single target rider. Nemo will be coming out, and that boy just chunks people into another dimension with the amount of damage he does. And that's just single target arts riders. I mean, when it comes to busters, I mean, if you have Ozymandias, Quetzalcoatl, Maeve, or even Ushiwaka Maru is pretty good as a single target quick rider. Kintoki rider is a very solid quick rider if you have him as well. Made Alter, like there's a lot of really good single target riders. And it's more or less like if you don't have a lot of these people, Mandricardo is going to be a very good person to fill in that gap, because really your only free-to-play options for single target riders, if you missed out on Ryoma and Kintoki rider, would be Ushi and Mandricardo. And this at least gives you two really solid options for both quick and arts, and they both fill a bit of a different role. While they both bring some support to the party, Ushiwaka Maru wants to stay on the field, whereas Mandricardo kind of wants to do some damage and then cycle himself out. So he's definitely going to be a very solid option for a lot of people's boxes, and I just wanted people to understand that he's not a bad servant by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of more new players or more normie players for FGO, no offense, will kind of look at servants that have these small demerits here and there, and then they'll just kind of write them off as being bad, when Mandricardo being able to cycle himself out is actually one of the more useful things that a servant can do. Again, look at Arash. But with that being said, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments down below. What do you guys think of Mandricardo? I think he's actually a really solid servant. I mean, I've already put him in one of the tier lists, and I thought he was actually really good. Not game breaking, not meta defining or anything along those lines, but just a very solid, good servant. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Peep the description for all that interesting stuff. And with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.